Welcome to the Great Beer State podcast from the Michigan Brewers Guild. The Great Beer State is a weekly show sharing conversations and stories from the passionate people who contribute to our vibrant Michigan beer community. It is made up of a mix between full-length archived interviews from the Guild's first documentary book project, A Rising Tide, Stories from the Michigan Brewers Guild, and conversations recorded in the here and now. Each episode is kicked off with a conversational update from host Scott Graham, Executive Director of the Guild, and the beer-evangelist Fred Biltman, author of A Rising Tide. Here's Scott and Fred. Welcome to episode 2 of season 2, 2021 of Michigan's Great Beer State podcast. I'm here with my good friend Scott Graham. Got an exciting interview for you, and catching up here in we've reached February of 2021. It's hard to believe, but here we are. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Fred. Nice to be with you again. And yeah, here we are a month into 2021.
Yep. And things are moving along. I'm still sort of basking in the glow of the post-conference education. We've been putting up the edited videos behind that registration. So if you attended the conference, you can watch all of that content still by logging in. And we got all the Q&A and the intros up. And it's just one of those things. I'm feeling pretty good. And it was interesting hearing, we'll get into Scott King in a second, but hearing Scott wax on the old days and those early conferences, it was an interesting sort of comparison between then and now.
Yeah, quite a bit different. I think it's a good note that the conference presentations will be available for some weeks going forward yet, so they can be reviewed, or I suppose you could even have a little viewing party if you wanted to, if you had registration and wanted to share it with friends.
Yeah. So are there any other updates for members of our brewing community, allied trade, or of course our beer loving public? Anything people should be hearing about here in February?
Well, it's kind of a save the date, or maybe I'd be planting a seed, but we're trying something new this year in looking at some of our financial shortcomings or hardships that have been caused due to the cancellation of events due to COVID-19. We are actually planning 3 different golf outings in 2021, which will be new for us. They're intended to be your typical kind of fundraiser golf outing where people can get together, and we'll be hopefully selling a few sponsorships, and sell either individual golfers can join or twosomes or foursomes. I think that the first 2 events are probably going to be kind of more industry, but they're certainly open to anybody that's interested. And then the third one in the fall, we're going to try and make into a bigger, more kind of multi-day potential fun opportunity. But anyway, we're going to have 3 golf outings. The first one will be June 9th in Rockford, which is a Wednesday. The second one will also be on a Wednesday, August 11th in Lansing. And then the third one will be October 9th, and that's a Saturday. That's going to be at Treetops in Gaylord. And I think that there might be the opportunity, and we're working with Treetops to offer some packages. So if somebody wanted to spend an overnight or a couple of nights and do more golfing, that's going to be an option. And being on a Saturday, I'm hoping that we can turn it into something that focuses maybe more on our enthusiast members, more on people outside the industry. And again, these are all open to anybody who's interested. There are limits. You have to have a finite number of golfers, 72, 144 to make it work, so that it's possible that they could fill up. Hopefully they do. And we haven't really started promoting that yet broadly, but we are going to be soon. So I just wanted to take a moment and talk about our Great Beer State golf outings coming up in 2021.
All right, exciting news. And w- anything you're processing in terms of when decisions are being made regarding beer festivals or other existing things for the coming year?
Well, I wish I didn't have to think about this, but we do have our spring beer festival in Traverse City on the calendar for May 8th. We have not announced a cancellation of that event yet, although it's a little challenging to be sure that it's going to happen, and that might be optimistic. I'm having some doubts.
Hmm.
I think the beginning of March, or certainly in March, we would need to be moving forward if we were going to have the event. So, with it being the middle of February right now, we probably got 2 or 3 weeks to still be in wait and see mode before we decide whether we're going to be able to go ahead with that, or sadly have to cancel it, as here we are now a full year cycle into canceled beer festivals.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unbelievable and hard to fathom, but here we are, and doing our best to move forward and be safe and and do what's right. So it'll go as it goes. I guess as long as we're documenting and updating people, we do have limited dine-in has returned to the state, which includes our brew pub and a microbrewery and brewer members that have tasting rooms. So I think everybody's got the drill now in terms of how to go about that and find the information. And I think it's just important to note to check in ahead of time and see what your favorite brewery's doing, because there's all sorts of different approaches in terms of whether they're open and what their hours are and what their adaptation is. But we certainly encourage you to support them, and be kind and follow protocols and enjoy Michigan beer at your local establishment. And now there's some indoor dining and drinking has returned.
Yeah, which is it's great to be returning to some indoor, but it's, I think, still a little frustrating that the capacity is limited to 25%. So your comments are really well taken, that it can be frustrating for guests to adhere to the protocols, to maybe not be able to get into a place. A lot of our brewery tasting rooms are not that big. It could be, capacity inside could be well under 20 people in many cases, which is pretty limited. But hopefully that now that it's going in the right direction, it will continue to, and it'll open up more and more. So yeah, please be thoughtful. No, nobody wants to deal with somebody that's ornery. It's hard enough anyway.
That's right. All right. Well, speaking of moving forward and heading in the right direction, I think it's a good time to head to our Brewers dozen. So we're talking about our uh, routine, our tradition of giving brewery shout outs on every episode. And tell us about the region you've selected for today.
I thought we would go back to the greater Detroit area, and I looked at a collection of breweries north, in thinking about the subject, the interviewee today, Scott King. His King Brewing Company opened in Pontiac. So I started in Pontiac and then kind of looked right around there until I got to about 13 breweries. And interestingly enough, when King Brewing Company was there, there was also Bose Brewery and Bistro. Is that exactly? I'm trying to remember exactly what it was called.
Yeah,
Neither
I
of
think
those
so.
are open today, but there are two breweries in Pontiac, one of them being Fillmore 13 Brewery.
Yeah. And the second one being Experimentation Brewing Company. So Pontiac Brewing, the
Yes,
tradition
and
of
then
brewing
if
in
you,
Pontiac is alive and well.
yes, indeed. And if we broaden out from there, we get to a collection of breweries in other towns, starting with Rustic Leaf Brewing Company in Waterford.
And another town that was way ahead of the curve in terms of supporting Michigan craft beer is Clarkston, and you've got Parker's Hilltop Brewery, which is newer than that, but I remember Clarkston being a little bit of a beacon back in the early days.
Yeah, certainly. And then Rochester Mills Production Brewery is in Auburn Hills, in view of the old Palace of Auburn Hills, which is also a thing of the past now.
And that is paired with the Rochester Mills Beer Company in Rochester, which is their tasting room and restaurant.
Right. And nearby also, well, it's in Rochester Hills, is Griffin Claw Clubhouse, which is an offshoot of the Griffin Claw operation.
And then you head over to Shelby Township and you've got Sherwood Brewing Company, longtime member.
Yes, our old friend Ray Sherwood, and also Brooks Brewing Company in Shelby Township.
And then heading over to Oxford, we've got One Drop Brewing Company.
Yep, one of our newer members. We also in that same area, and our newer brewery is Gravel Capital Brewing.
And then you've got Homegrown Brewing Company.
And we'll wrap things up by traveling. It's a little further away, but we'll travel to Armada, where Blake's Brewing Company is a nice brewery in its own right, and it's part of the bigger Blake's Hard Cider.
All right, so that's the Brewers Dozen. Shout out to all those brewers and encourage you all to give them a visit, give them a shout out, and enjoy the tasty beers and beverages. So that brings us to introducing our guest for this episode, who is Scott King. Scott is a big personality that's been part of the guild for a long time. Began brewing really pre-brewing scene, or at least very, very early days. And I thought it was a great conversation. And you're a little more up to speed on what he's been up to the last couple years and what he's doing now. But King Brewing Company was small but mighty, and Scott was certainly an important voice in the early days of our formation, both of the scene and the guild.
Yeah, and anybody who's spent much time with Scott knows that he likes to get kind of wax philosophical or maybe even rant a little bit. So it was fun to listen to Scott talking about, his vision and what he sees and has seen. He's got a lot of scope and perspective, and he is quite an insightful thinker. So I really enjoyed listening to his interview, which I think you mentioned it, but it was from a couple years back, as part of the Rising Tide book project that you worked on. But yes, it's again another very interesting interview, like you said, with a noteworthy personality, longtime personality in the industry.
Yeah, and if you think about what he's sharing in his stories, and also if you think about when King Brewing Company opened, this story fits in a lot with talking to Larry and talking to Ted Badgerow and talking to the others that were opening at that time, and it helps give a little lens to what the pre legislation on John Lenardos is what I meant to say, with Detroit Mackinac and Traffic Jam and Snug, and this really does, among other things, it gives a little picture and a little sequencing to the early 90s, when we were talking about a couple of breweries forging their way through prior to the brew pub license, prior to the microbrewery license. I think this interview is a good complement to all those other episodes. So with that, we can head.
I do too. I'm sure folks will find it very interesting.
Yeah, so we can head back to the Cask Corridor. We talked to Scott and Jolly Pumpkin Artisan Ales of Detroit in 2018, working on the Rising Tide. Here's Scott King.
Cheers to Scott King.
We've been kind of going out and just collecting stories, talking about the arc of Michigan brewing community and the history of the Michigan Brewers Guild. And of course, you and I have spent a lot of time in those circles, known each other a long time. So maybe just tell me what you were just saying, like what is your origin story for brewing? How'd you get into making beer and end up part of this community?
Yeah, I started, as most guys did, making beer in my basement, and in college, actually in high school, I was even making beer, screwing around with fermentation stuff, and then I ended up, after college, moving out to Seattle, and it was a hotbed, 1989 in Seattle, and there's a lot of good beers going on there, so I started getting a little more into it out there. Moved to Colorado in late 89. Early 90, went to grad school at CU Boulder, and that was where it was really taking off there, right on the Pearl Street Mall there, with the BA starting there and the Homebrew Association, and joined a member of the Hop Barley and the Ailers, which was the local homebrew club there, which was Charlie founded back in the day. Adam Avery was in that club. A lot of great brewers came out of there. The guys from Fort Collins out at New Belgium would stop in. Jeff Liebisch, I think his name was the member there, and started homebrewing there, and then worked for a guy named Tom Tomlinson at High Country Brewing in Boulder. He ended up selling off, and they moved it into Estes Park Brewing Company, and then went downtown in Denver and started working a little bit with Great Divide Brewing Company. From there, came back for family reasons to Michigan, saw a big gap out here, and opened the Berkeley front in Berkeley with a buddy of mine, worked there for about a year, and then got full going in my brewery out in Pontiac. And I think we started in 93, opened in 94 with a buddy of mine, Jeff Gibbs. And yeah, started brewing, I think, late 94. And from there, just kept going along. I think we started, what year was the Guild? 97, something like that? 97?
Yeah.
And we had talked a lot about it. Rex was a regular tap member and coming to our place and drinking beer all the time. And we had talked a lot with Rex. And I actually sat with Greg Mitchell and Larry Bell one night down at the Stroh River place. And I think you were in that room.
Yeah, I sure was.
And started hatching an idea. So there was a lot of people had this thing all in their mind about doing something. And it was mostly, I think there was another guild up in the UP going at the time. And we kind of wanted to do something down here, and eventually got to that meeting in Saginaw down the road 6 to 8 months later after that.
So could you describe like either the I don't know, the landscape or the community, like what you saw to get started in 93, 94? What did you feel you were getting into?
Well, I thought, you saw it out in Colorado, and it was kind of still like a fringe hippie thing. It was a completely different scene. I mean, the beers were okay, but, it was, I just thought like in Detroit area, I was down here, I came back here, I knew Tom Burns and heard all of his stories from out at Boulder Brewing Company. And we just thought the landscape with Tom's working on it, and then, obviously what Larry was doing out in Kalamazoo, and, the whole buy local thing. And, did I ever think it would be anything close to what it is today? No, but we thought we could have a little fringe business going, and it would be a small thing. But it was about
you came back in 93.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're talking about the landscape, you're talking about 3 breweries and 4 breweries. And then
it's funny. I actually pulled out my original business plan. I wrote this ridiculously 50-page business plan to start my place, and it was all these numbers. And I think the latest data I had on Bell's at that point was a little over 5,000 barrels, and we thought that was insanity. And I think Detroit Mackinac was doing 1,500 barrels, 1,800 barrels, but that was that seemed like good enough, and we thought that was going to be like a really great thing. Never did you think millions of barrels in the market share that we're getting, but it was, we thought it was going to be a fringe business. I always looked at this as like, some people are plumbers, some people are electricians, some people are school teachers. I was just a brewer. It was a job, it was something fun. The concept of making money was just not really.
Right.
And it worked out that it never really was for me.
But for you, I mean, it sounded like you came back. You had a sense of, you'd seen it work in other communities, but you also had a sense of it being a calling that, if I'm going to be a butcher, I got to open a butcher shop. If I'm going to be a brewer and I come to a community,
Right.
that's lacking brewers, then it's time to start a brewery and bring that to the community.
Right.
Is
And
that
also, I
fair?
mean, honestly, I hope that, Larry, I thought the beers being brewed in Michigan compared to Colorado were horrible. I mean, honestly, when I started working at the Berkeley front and we got in I think Motor City was just coming in there and we tried John's beers and we were getting the Bell's beers, and it was back in the day where one time you'd open a bottle of Bell's and you'd be mopping your ceiling because the shit was hitting the ceiling, or the next time you'd be trying to get any level of head on the beer whatsoever, and it was all cloudy and it just was like, this beer sucks. This is not good. I mean, we can do better than this. So there was, honestly, like there's a void, but also I'm going to bring what they're doing in Colorado to Michigan to make
Well,
better
and you'd
beer.
already, for being early 90s and having worked at 4 or 5 breweries already, kind of coming from a market and a community of craftspeople that are basically a decade ahead.
Right.
So you're coming with knowledge and with expertise.
Well,
and
and that was the whole thing from the whole time I was here. It was always whether it was predicting the IPA trend or whatever. We started making a pale ale that was, 40 IBUs, and we thought it was crazy for here. And then people thought, oh, you're so ahead of the curve and you know all this. But it really wasn't that in any part of my career, it wasn't that I was so innovative or creative. I just literally started on the line earlier than everybody else did. So when you saw what was going on in Colorado, or you saw what was happening, whether it be big beers, I mean, we did an old ale that was 7.5% alcohol, and at the time, I think it was the second most alcoholic beer in the state compared to what Bell's is, Third Coast Old Ale. But it was not. We just were taking what I knew, and trying to just get on the line, and the speed of which everybody kind of caught up to that 5-10 years later. It was never like I had such great ideas. I just started earlier, so
And when you came back and you were looking at the kind of void in terms of where the quality line was and where your experience as a drinker was, did you it sounds like on one level it was frustrating. Did you also see that as an opportunity? Like, oh, there's
absolutely.
There's some clear road ahead.
Yeah, one of my favorite breweries. I loved what Doug Odell was doing, and I loved the Odell's beers, and I just saw that. And he was a draft only brewery at the time, and we opened as draft only, which in retrospect seems absolutely ridiculous, but he was making it work, and we thought we could get enough market share with draft. But again, our goals were, like, our business plan was so modest. We were talking 500-800 barrels, draft only, small little tasting room, and call it a day, so.
You did, you started with a tasting room?
Yeah, we had we were open 4 to 7 on Thursday and Friday, and 1 to 4 on Saturday. And that was because I was working and I didn't want to work any more of it. So it was like, that was it,
And so you're opening with a tasting room and with that license is also right around the time that the law changed. Did that, when you moved back, had the opening already existed for the microbrew and brew pub license, or did it happen while you were
literally, I think it happened in '92. I think that's when Larry and Tom had really pushed it through. But the problem with it was we ran into is that it was literally, the ink was still wet. And we went to several communities. So we ended up in Pontiac. And it was not because, Pontiac's this great place where we were. It was what happened was we went to Rochester, we went to Milford, we went to a lot of those more affluent Oakland County communities. And they couldn't say no because it was actually a legal thing, but what they did is they screwed us on the zoning. So every time we'd get there, they would say, well, we don't have a zoning for breweries, we have to create something. And then it became a super expensive thing to meet their zoning. So what we did is we went into books and found out who has existing zoning for breweries. That's literally on the books. And at that time, it was Frankenmuth, Kalamazoo, Detroit, and Pontiac. And I wasn't going to Frankenmuth, I wasn't going to Kalamazoo, and at the time I didn't, in retrospect, I should have come to Detroit, but so we ended up in Pontiac. But that was solely because we could actually then say, well, here's the zoning, it says brewery on your thing, and we could meet those zoning things. But otherwise, we just got the runaround. It was like we were making, we were building a meth lab or something at that time. People didn't want us, and it was funny, like.
Well, and most of those communities, they didn't, now it's so backwards to think of it now in terms of where communities, all of them are saying, you know what we need?
Right.
We need to
that
go
was
out,
the funny
how can
thing.
we get a brewery to open in our town? And back then it was like, what the hell is a brewery? And just what sort of black magic are you going to bring to it?
They had ideas. It was going to be drunks. It was going to stink. It was going to be all these things. But it was funny, like about 2 years, year and a half after I had opened in Pontiac, Milford called me back and said, we've been doing some research. We were out west and we really think this is a good thing. And I'm like, well, I'm already set up here. But yeah, it was funny because it was literally, there was not open arms in any way stretch. In no way was they wanted us there at that time. So
Yeah.
so we ended up in Pontiac, in a real crappy part of Pontiac. But, it really, at the time, we were there for 18 years, I think. So,
So tell me about getting rolling, getting beers going across the bar and out and about. What were the early years like?
We started, back in the day, the things we wanted to do, as most breweries then, we were kind of following like that British brewing tradition kind of thing. So our first beers was a brown ale, King's Crown Brown Ale, and then we ended up doing, what we wanted to do was a brown ale, an ESB, and a pale ale as our 3 beers. Real exciting beers, And then we introduced a porter, which again was really crazy at the time, but we used to get ridiculed. I mean, we had people literally and it was ridiculous. They'd say, oh, where are you getting your water? From the Rouge River, which doesn't even make any geographical sense whatsoever. But there was this concept that there is no way, no how you can make good beer and you can make beer in Michigan and people are going to buy it. But, and I went to every wholesaler, and some of them were just straight up jerks. Some of them were nice, but no thank you. And then we ended up with Greg Mitchell, with Rave for the most part. And then actually Powers Distributing picked us up, and we're kind of a little bit ahead of the curve. And Powers was really, but that was the other part of it, is the wholesalers were completely opposed to the whole idea, except for a few. But Powers kind of took us on, and they actually tried, But yeah, it was real simple beers. Literally out there hand selling each freaking glass of beer, each keg, going in there. I think me and Jeff probably drank about 80% of our production for the first 6 months. We got to go out and support the brand, which means just getting loaded at different bars around town.
So let's fast forward a little bit, or maybe right kind of in that time where, those early conversations start with Rex about getting people together, and by that point, so by the time we started, I think there was over 30 brewers,
right.
Maybe more.
Right.
Which is already it's sort of amazing to see that short period of time and so many new entries.
Right.
And can you remember any of those conversations or what the first get-togethers were like?
I think it was the name of the game was that I think we were all experiencing the same thing, which is basically people pressing back against us saying you can't do this. And, it's great to be I'm out there on my own, swimming alone. But at some point we all realized that if we unify our message and, what was the old, high tide rises all ships stuff, that we could get some kind of unified message, that we could get a little traction in the marketplace. Because if you're one guy, 2 guys out there saying this, people think you're just an anomaly freak out there. But when you have a louder voice with a larger group of people, And I think it was very effective. And I think that, we had the right things in it. You realize that obviously you're not the only one thinking about this stuff. Obviously there's a void in this marketplace. Obviously this beer can be sold and people do want it. And it was great to be able to share the experiences of, giving somebody an IPA or even a brown ale or whatever for the first time and seeing what people's reactions were. And then talking about, literally we shared everything back then. If you needed hops, if you needed technical knowledge, that we were always a phone call away, or popping out of the early days when Saluski and Wayne Burns and those guys were starting in there. We were always back and forth talking to each other about styles and making beer and getting ingredients. And I mean, that was the other thing is back then the equipment, the ingredients, the stuff, it wasn't so readily available. I mean, you had to find this stuff a lot of times to make some of these beers and find the right hops and get leads on stuff. So, having that resource of a team of people all with the same goal. And I really felt like there was never a competition. I remember even then some of the unwritten rules were you never take off another Michigan beer to put your beer on. I mean, you would never go into an account and say, I'm going to target that, to boot that, to put mine. You'd always try to get another handle next to them as opposed to ever looking, even if it was a weak handle.
Right.
But that's certainly not the case anymore.
Yeah. So as the guild got rolling, what was your... what did your involvement look like, and were there, besides that coming together, were there challenges for the organization and kind of, I don't know, what did the first handful of years of actually being I
think obviously the whole thing was super dicey. I mean, it was really I think was Larry the first president, or was surprised? Larry was, and I think that was that we needed him, but he was super busy and stuff. And honestly, I thought the whole thing was going to tank. I mean, we were one rainy Saturday away from the whole thing just being dead in the water.
We had a rainy Saturday
multiple times. And I really think, and I say this to Drew all the time when I still stand. I think Drew was just that guy at the right time that just had the wherewithal to do it. And I think Drew's presidency of the Guild really put it together. And then obviously Sandy, God bless her soul, like actually taking a bunch of idiot drunks together and trying to put together a QuickBooks and look at money and how this thing is going to actually work was really, really helpful. And I can't remember when I got on the board the first time, but I kind of was just on the outside a lot, talking to people, and there was other people doing it. But Drew, I remember being helpful, and then actually organizing the finances was also like a huge thing to make the thing work. Yeah. And then obviously when you came in, it really set the real, solidity of the whole thing and kind of grew us all up to get help that we needed to grow in the way we have. So.
And so, thank you. And what do you feel like having the Guild in place, what did it do for the marketplace? What did it do for people besides the brewers and that sense of unity? Did it have an impact on how the rest of the world viewed us? Did it have an impact on us growing businesses?
We had, and you know this as well as I do, but we had this, like we couldn't see the forest through the trees, so to speak, in the sense that we had these ideas. I mean, it was everybody like, you had all the members bitching about stuff and wanting, I want a billboard, I want a billboard, I want a billboard. And what we really did is those, at the time, it seemed like it was never enough, but those small things, having those festivals on a regular basis, doing the coasters even, putting up posters and stuff, and getting that kind of like, so that there was a branding that was happening that didn't seem like it was happening very much, but it slowly took hold on people, I think. And I think without that, everybody wanted more. We wanted to see more out of the Guild, but I think that at the time we were doing, and I think the festivals really, really, really started to do it. I think those times that people would have, we didn't see the contact of I hate this because this guy I was working with, but these taste makers, as they call it. There was always that one guy, and we saw it in our tap room, he was the home brewer, he was the beer expert. And you could get him there with his buddies, and then this guy, and then then the next guy in that group became the tastemaker of his friends, and you could see this growing outside of it. And it was all based on being in the know and being the cool guy in the group to get it going. And I think that we all wanted so much more. We had such grandiose ideas, but the little things we were doing along the way seemingly is what really turned the corner, I think, on it, And just the overall success of all the breweries independently, what they were doing. So it was like this coupling effect of the individual breweries doing their own thing with this unified message across the board that really kind of
started to reverberate and amplify.
Right, and then obviously national, the whole thing was taken off all at once. So it's really, I think we were, I like to believe the shit we were doing in Michigan was like elemental towards the whole nation, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So, the stuff in the nation, I think to this day, I think we're one of the oldest and most successful guilds in the country. So, obviously what we were doing at that time was right, so.
Yeah. I don't think that's a stretch at all. So as a brewer and as a business person, and running a small business, and we're all getting our asses kicked, what was it like to make the decision to get involved and become more active and join the board? What was that?
It was great. Honestly, it made me feel more relevant and more. We were struggling. We struggled almost the whole time I was open. And, and actually having that, I looked at it as when you get beat up in business day after day after day and you're struggling, to go together and feel like you're actually doing something that is successful and meaningful, it really gives you that backbone to go back. I used to feel after we come back from a well-run festival or, our conferences that we do eventually, I came back invigorated to get back into my business and want to do it. So as much as it was sometimes a time crunch, being away from your business, I saw it as almost like a mental holiday to go back and, think about why I'm doing this in the first place and how I'm going to keep doing it. So, it really provided, so as much as it was an altruistic somewhat to help the communities, it was very much a selfish thing for me in the early years too, to really get my mind right to come back. And like I said, that sharing of information I mean, I don't know what, if you looked up the true definition of a guild, and I'm sure there's some shared stuff, but that kind of sense of community within the brewing community was huge to me at that point. So
Yeah, and I feel like it helped shape. I mean, you were saying about you were talking about Michigan's influence on the country, and I think there's a lot of things that we're really proud of here, and I often go back to, like, if we hadn't gotten together, I don't think we would have had that impact.
I was at a tasting. It was the Kent Beverage tasting. I don't know. It was early on. We were doing one of those tastings out there, and I was standing next to a brewery from Wisconsin. I can't remember who it was, and they were talking to one of the things, and I overheard the guy say, "We just do terrible in Michigan. It's like a black box. These guys have locked us out of this state." By these guys, he was talking about and that's what we did. I mean, we faced every one of those. When Brooklyn came in, when there was the bombardment, we kept loyal to Buy Michigan, and I think it was really huge back in that time, and I think it opened us up because a lot of those national breweries that might have come in here and dominated, we sent a very clear message that Buy Michigan, don't buy these beers, and I think it really helped grow a lot of our breweries in the state.
Well, and I think maybe even more importantly, I feel like it was our customers, both drinkers and retailers, that sent the message. Like,
right.
we had given them an abundance of choice and abundance of reason to believe in our scene, to believe in a collection of breweries, not just one. And I feel like they championed that on our behalf, which is pretty cool
right.
to watch. I mean, that always gave me a sense of pride.
Right. Well, I think that's the other thing is eventually once you get into that guild kind of situation, we started with the conferences and we started doing those things like that. It became competitive to have good beers. Like, you didn't want to show up with shitty beer because you were in this group of your peers that you were doing this whole thing together.
And you're going to get drank at people's most honest moment, about 3 in the morning.
Exactly. And you wanted to take
and they're going to tell you.
I mean, if you're throwing a couple cases in or a keg or whatever to take to the conference, you wanted to make sure that you're taking your best stuff so that nobody, and I think that level of competition is always healthy in terms of building. Because, I mean, like I said, early on, I thought Michigan beers were not very good, including mine, to be honest with you. But I think that sense of we need to have, you can't just talk about how buy Michigan. You got to make sure you're giving the consumer something that tastes good, so.
So we talked about the market and the festivals. What about the conference? What has the conference meant to you, and how did it?
The conference to me, I mean, that was those first couple ones. I mean, certainly, hilarity, but we certainly, Larry. I mean, again, I'm not here to blow Larry, but he put his stamp on this. He paid for it the first couple of years, and I think he lost some money on it. But I think it's been one of the greatest things. Actually, my thing on the board, the greatest thing I ever did was fight for that free member or that free thing, and I pushed really hard to get it, and I'm really glad we did. And I think it's given our brewers a lot of opportunity. And like I said, it gets pretty gnarly. Sometimes you're there for 3 days, and it feels like you've been there for 6 weeks. But it definitely there's a lot of time with your other brewers and with experts, and you had a great part in bringing in some of the some really high-end speakers. I mean, if you look at the speakers that have come to our conferences, it's pretty amazing, and it really, again, I don't know how much people's beer improved by sitting in those rooms listening to people, but certainly that community, again, of like, we're all in this trying to make good beer, and let's stay up till 3 o'clock talking about it, and so on and so forth. It really has changed the landscape, I think.
I feel like there's some funny stories, and if any come to mind, feel free to share them. But I think even some of our, we've had some knockdown, drag out sort of debates, it would be a polite word for some of our conversations and sort of, challenges. But I feel like the fact that we held space we held some private space by getting together in places that we could work that shit out in the appropriate place.
Right.
I mean, what did that sort of? What's your take on that in terms of how did we work through some of our disagreements or different perspectives?
I think that everybody had a very different view as to what they wanted in changing those bylaws and thinking about how we wanted to present ourselves was it's amazing to me now, and in retrospect, especially as my life has gone on, how much people cared about it. To be honest with you, I mean, the passion of people, and I hate that word in this industry, but the passion of people, it was passionate. And I'm talking like passion, like I'm going to punch you in the face passion, you know, and screaming at each other and F-bomb after F-bomb kind of thing. And thank God we locked those doors, didn't let other people in to see our. But, you know, in the end of the day, you know, and then how many times did people like, I'm quitting, and then 6 months later, I'm coming back. I mean, how much did we go through this stuff? I mean, it was ridiculous. But in the end of the day, I think you're right. I think we somehow, and it was mostly because we had the right leadership at the right time, I think. Which is, again, you know, when I started, like, it was literally a bunch of ne'er-do-well drunks, to be honest with you, smoking pot in the hop room, and basically long-haired.
The Canute valve.
Yeah, the Canute valve, and then all of a sudden, you know, we started to develop like professionalism that kind of like saw us through some of that shit, I think. And I think, you know, we were really lucky to. I mean, it's kind of like that. You know, you put an infinite number of monkeys on typewriters, and it'd be, you know, it's the best of times, it's the blurst of times. Oh, damn, start again, you know. I mean, but I mean, we definitely had enough time to do it. Though, I mean, I think that, like I said, I that's what I really see. I've been fighting for it, because obviously, if we want this thing to go on, we've got to engage the new brewers, the younger brewers and stuff, because we literally, if you look at Eric just resigning or retiring or whatever in the last 6 months, I mean, I think Eric was on almost every board. So we've had that like line from the beginning, and now we're getting into this new era of these other guys are going to have, you know, if it's important anymore, and if people want to do this, we're going to need that, because I really think, like I said, I mentioned Drew. I think Larry was a good like figurehead just because he was Larry. Your long-term thing and transitioning us through, what was it, Nurko, or not a Nurko, Uric through into getting Scott Graham on board, and I think that's the. You know, any organization needs great leadership, and I think we really had some really great leaders in our organization to do it.
So when you look to kind of present day, and I know that your career has had some changes and challenges, and but I, without having even caught up with you, I'm sure that you're still rooting for the community of better beer, no matter what. What do you think is the call to action for a young brewer today in terms of their involvement, their engagement in community, whether that's the guild or just being a fellow member of the hall? What do you think are the lessons we can take away from all the shit we've been through and inspire them with?
You know, I think that the whole thing to me starts with community in general. Like, I never looked at it like I said, most of us came out of this British pub, British brewery kind of thought about what American brewers could be, or maybe even a German, and then eventually Belgian bistro style beers or whatever. But it was all based on community, and my whole thing was always the beer was the secondary thing for the community, and whether that be a family reunion, a first communion, a death in the family, whatever, the brewer's job was to provide the beer to be there for the community, and the beer was the community. And for some reason it strikes me as in the last couple of years, it's flip-flopped, that the beer is the most important thing. And it seems like we've lost the sense of community and I think maybe this is where the guild can come on stronger, and to kind of create more of a community bond around the beer, as opposed to the beer being the focal point of the whole conversation. So, I mean, you know, it's really hard to do. I mean, honestly, right now, the backlash of, it's funny because, you know, when we fought for this stuff, it was against the yellow fizzy beer and this corporate takeover of the beer, and now it's almost like, I wouldn't say we're back to that, but in a strange way, it's become this thing to itself and not about the community of people. And I don't know how we can get back to there. I think it takes, you know, leadership, but I mean, there's obviously, I think, you know, I feel a lot of backlash in the craft beer community now, that from the general public of, oh, another brewery, just what we need is another brewery. How many more breweries? Oh, your beer's so fancy. I mean, to the latest, whatever that comedian is a couple of weeks ago, to all the backlash. I mean, it's almost becoming a punchline.
Yeah.
And it's kind of depressing to be put, because sometimes I feel like, God, I put my whole life and we've come full circle back to almost this corporate beer culture that we started with,
Well, in a way, I like what you're saying. Well, one of the things I pull from it is that, I think in the last 10 years, we've also seen the beer, the liquid, the idea, the IPA, the whatever, be co-opted by those who we were fighting against. So
Right.
there's a bunch of different, you could talk about acquisitions and the whole debate surrounding that for forever. That would be a whole nother conversation. But to me, in this conversation, I think, they can co-opt certain things we do.
Right.
What they can't replace is our sense of, kind of independent small community and this living, beating heartbeat. But they can make IPA, and that's
Right.
what they're doing now. And or if they can't, they buy breweries that can. And
Right.
And so this large sort of faceless beast that created the marketplace that we had to dig out of.
Right.
They are starting to wear our jersey when
Right.
they want to, and so I think it becomes more important to not just battle with beer, to say that what we offer, what we think is important in our communities, in our world or marketplace, is bigger than IPA.
Right. Well, and I think that, it's funny because you're seeing more startups and more of the smaller breweries in Michigan. I don't know, we're at 300. And nationally, they're going back to this concept of, I'm going to serve a small community. I'm going to be the local pub in town serving this beer. And even though you can go to any bar, you remember, that was one of the challenges of brew pubs, because you go to a brew pub because you could get these beers. You can get these beers anywhere now. You go to any bar and you can find one of these things.
Right.
But yet that community of people sitting in those places where beer is made is still the strong part of our industry right now. That's why the success, you're not seeing the next Founders or Bell's selling, mass distribution around 30 states. You're seeing small guys selling that 1,000, 1,200 barrels out of their own place to a local community. And I think that's where the Guild has to focus on, and how we can improve upon that and help those people. I think there's some legislative work that we could do to help those people. I think the 1,000 barrel self-distribution is ridiculous compared to other states in the country. And I know that's another battle, but I think that we have to continue to protect that original concept, which is, like I started my story with, is we didn't think we were going to be anything. We thought we were going to sell 800, 1,000 barrels, 1,200 barrels, and how can the guilds support those, whether it's through marketing efforts or through legislative efforts, to get that to stick in our communities, so that they're not being stamped out by national chains or, faux
Well, I think it goes both
operations.
directions. It's also a call for them to get engaged and a reason to be members. I think that because when we started, I remember the phone tree of we're begging people to be members.
Right.
And at that time, the distributing brewery, that the microbrewery that had aspirations to be statewide or multi-state.
Right.
From a marketing-based organization, it was like, well, they have more reason. They need to build their brand. I'm just planning on selling my small community. I'm a brew pub model. I don't need the group. Right. And when we look at this from a connective tissue networking, support the entrepreneur or owner or brewer. Nowadays, it kind of gets reversed. We're like, okay, if you're going to be out by yourself in your town as a 1,000 barrel brewery, you need resources,
Right.
more than now that the size and the scale has changed. Like, the reality is a 400,000 barrel brewery can manage themselves and their resources and their education program without an organization.
Yeah, Larry told me one time he'd quit for his year or whatever, and he said, well, I quit and I was selling 200,000 barrels. When I joined, I was selling 500,000 barrels. Obviously, I didn't need you guys or whatever his numbers were. So it was like, well, you're missing the point here, dude.
Exactly. And I think that any size and any model can get to the point where they don't feel they need an organization. But I think what we're saying, and what I appreciate hearing from you, is that there are benefits beyond branding and marketing. There are benefits in terms of belonging to a larger group and having your voice heard and being able to affect change as well.
Right. I was, early on when I'd come home from, like I said, I'm going to be scratching my head, like, what can we do? And I literally, when you look at the difference between large breweries, small breweries, brew pubs, distributing breweries, and then you've got like the west side of the state, the east side of the state, the UP, it was like, how do we kind of find one message? And I literally thought we should have spent some money at that time. I thought, let's spend some money on a marketing guy to come in here and try to like look at this giant, massive difference between what's going on in Grand Rapids, what's going on in Detroit, what's going on between these giant distributors, what's going on, all these things, and come up with a singular message. And I think that was what we did from the very beginning, and we fought and just said we want to promote Michigan beer, which was what it is. And I still think that has to happen, but I think that if you look at now the 350 breweries or whatever, you're going to find a giant piece of that pie is small guys in small towns selling that 500, 800 barrels of beer. And that's where we have to serve those people. And I hope that our organization can see that that is what the organization needs right now, that 75% of those breweries are all in one piece of the pie, basically, you know?
Yeah, I think so. I also think that, you know, whatever we do legislatively, whatever we do marketing-wise, the act of coming together might be, might build more muscle as a community than any of those actual action items.
Well,
that's why you and I have a 20-something year.
And I still think the idea of, I mean, these guys that are starting out, some of these guys still want to know about hopping schedules or want to know about new hop oils that are on the market or whatever. So that sharing of like technical information is still a huge part to anybody. If you want to go there and you want to sit with Alec Mull, for example, you can do that in our organization. That's pretty cool, you know?
Yeah, it's really cool. And not everybody's. When you have this many operators, there's no way that the educators are all going to come visit you at your doorstep and say,
absolutely,
hey, you're making beer. I think it's really important you know this. Yep. You're going to have to attach yourself to opportunities.
Absolutely. And I think it's easy. And I mean, honestly, the cost, I would love to see, I mean, I don't know what the numbers are, but I know you're north of $2 million operating budget in the Guild at this point, which is absolutely crazy to me when you think about it. But I still think we have to, and I know that the Guild, and I know Scott Graham in particular, is still very sensitive to the concept of what the cost structure is for these members, and being cognizant that to a lot of these guys, I mean, you go to one of these festivals, you pay your $250 table fee, you bring a couple of people, take away from work, you're putting up in a hotel, you're doing this stuff. I remember that it was a strain for us, which I'm not saying I was on the board, but getting that free hotel room when I was on the board, it really helped my ass out a lot because, and I think we have to be cognizant and continue to find value and use our money that's coming in to be supportive of the real financial concerns of, I mean, it doesn't sound like much, a couple grand here or there 3 times a year, but I mean, if you do all the festivals, all the things, you could be in $5-10 grand a year if you're taking a handful. I know with New Holland, when you guys are bringing that team, even though you got a bigger brewery, that was a financial commitment that you guys were put in there. So, and hopefully, obviously, New Holland saw the value in that. And how do we translate that value to people who say like, well, I don't want to spend $1,000 for that. How do we show them that this value is there for you, even though it's a struggle for you now, you know?
Thanks, man, for everything you did for the group.
Hey, thanks, Fred.
For sitting down and chatting.
Pleasure, man.
Thanks for listening and sharing while supporting Michigan breweries and craft beer everywhere. The Michigan Brewers Guild was formed in 1997 with its first summer beer festival taking place in July of 1998. Its now 5 annual festivals are dedicated exclusively to Michigan beer brewed by more than 270 member breweries. The Michigan Brewers Guild exists to promote and protect the passionate Michigan beer industry in every way possible. To learn more, visit us at mibeer.com or say hello on one of our social media pages, as we love hearing from you. From coast to coast, from far and near, let's drink Michigan beer.
Let's drink